Welcome to Wales Tech Week 2021. Thank you to our partners. Enjoy the session.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this GlobalWelsh event on leadership. GlobalWelsh is on a mission to connect Wales's global diaspora and remind them of their homeland. So good evening, or as my colleague Gutu Hari has taught me to say, nos with ha. My name is Sarah Sands. My qualification for being here is that I spent 3 years editing the Today programme when its famous Welshman John Humphreys was a presenter. He put his birthplace Splot on the map. There was, of course, hot competition over whether John or Hugh Edwards were the BBC's most dedicated Welshmen. What I noticed with John was that beneath the Rottweiler was a man of profound emotion. If I wanted to shut him up, I would just start humming Bach's cello suites. When I left the Today programme, he headed straight off to Classic FM. So tonight, I'll be delighted to be looking at leadership with a panel of exceptional global leaders who all have Wales engraved in their hearts. Our premise is that you can take a leader out of Wales, but not Wales out of the leader. So we shall be looking at what the direct influences are. My instincts are to stereotype and ask if there is a kind of romantic quest to Welsh leadership. But luckily, I spoke to Walter May and Nan Williams at GlobalWelsh, and they said, could I not just bang on about the Welsh soul, because Wales also has a thriving business community. We shall be looking at what makes a leader and how much does the context matter. The current Prime Minister is said to have optimism and luck, which balances some characteristics not usually associated with leadership, such as order and devotion to detail. According to his arch critic, Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson would end cabinet meetings with the cry, "On to victory." Should leadership galvanise, or are there more managerial skills required? Does it depend on the sector, the competition, the type of employees? Is leadership post-COVID totally different to pre-COVID? The great test is whether CEOs have the authority or indeed the will to demand that employees return to their offices. We shall be looking at these issues with a distinguished panel of leaders. So if I can now introduce them. First of all, we have Warren East, CEO of Rolls Royce, our leading UK-based engine manufacturer. Also a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering, amongst many other honours, and previously at Arm Holdings, so terrific record in building up companies. So welcome, Warren. If I can ask you just that sort of one question, first of all, which is how much your Welshness has influenced your business destiny.
Goodness, I mean, Sarah, it's I knew you were going to ask something like this, and it's a really, really hard question to answer. I think we're all products of our past in some way, and I very much empathise with the sort of you can take the person out of Wales, but you can't take Wales out of the person. However, I think probably the products of the past are more my experiences rather than the fact that they happen to be in Wales. You know, I do see my childhood and growing up, and I can see the influence of some of that in the way in which I've gone about executing my career. I mean, it's interesting in your introduction you talked about Boris Johnson and luck. Well, I'm a great believer that a lot of success in business is about luck. But I also believe that you make your own luck. And maybe there is a little bit of Wales in this, in that, you know, we're a small country and we tend to punch above our weight in a number of spheres because we have to get noticed, and we have to, deal with competition that tends normally to have greater resources. And so, I think that does get into you in some way. And makes me, at any rate, very conscious of the need to be self-reliant, to make my own luck, which, as I say, is such a key part of it. And then the final bit I'd say is that people keep asking me about role models and things, and frankly, I can't tell you a role model that I have, but I do know that I was advised a long time ago that the only person who can be me is me, and people perform at their best when they're playing to their own strengths and being themselves rather than trying to be someone else. And I've always tried to practice that as well.
That's interesting. And your route was interesting. So you went to Texas, I think, didn't you? To or was that a Texan company that was?
Yeah, Texan company. I joined the semiconductor industry at a time when the semiconductor industry was really taking off, and they all told me that Moore's law would be done by the end of the decade. And of course, that was in the early 1980s. Moore's law is still going very strong. The semiconductor world has changed our world and the world in which we live in, absolutely phenomenally. You had some images at the start of the video there, but it really has, changed the way we do everything. I think the fast pace of change and the unbounded imagination required to drive business in that sector has definitely been very helpful for me in my career.
So was that just sort of foresight, or that you weren't just happened to be interested in something that was going to be a big future industry?
I think I was excited by it when I came out of university. When I came out of university, I'd done an engineering degree. I wanted to go and solve world hunger and everything that that engineers want to do. And my very first job, I was sort of fairly disillusioned, but I could see that my job was actually going to be completely rendered obsolete by semiconductors in a relatively short period of time. And so then I thought, well, I'm not going to have that. I think it's very exciting. I'll go and join the world of semiconductors.
So, and very relevant now as people are seeing, this huge change, this next revolution, the tech revolution, which will mean a lot of jobs go. But do you think that new jobs, there'll be enough new jobs to replace the old? And how do people keep moving to know that they're in the right place for the new jobs?
Yeah, well, yes, I think it's very important to be looking forward. And actually, this is part of the role of a leader, is to look forward and encourage and motivate people about the future. Where I am now, at Rolls Royce, we work in the world of power, and obviously the energy transition is hugely important to us. And, I talk to our young people and say, you are so privileged to be having a career during a time of such a major transition for the world, and then to work for a company like Rolls-Royce that can actually play a part in that. And for me, having been in semiconductors, which has played a fantastic part in changing the way the world works, now to be in the world of power, and going through the energy transition at that time, again, I feel really, really lucky. But the important thing is not to hang on to the past. Rolls-Royce won't have a business if we hang on to the past of making large gas turbines to burn fossil fuels and fly people around the world that way. We have to instead embrace technology and find different ways of doing it so that we can be net zero at the same time.
So would you, should I go and work in hydrogen, or if you were a graduate now, what would you pick as the equivalent of what you did at that time?
Yeah, I actually do think there are a couple of spheres. I mean, I think medtech and pharmaceuticals are making huge strides at the moment, but also the world of energy and power, and the need to, the world is going to consume vast quantities of power as the population grows. And it will continue to grow by another couple of billion by the middle of the century, probably. And people are getting more affluent. The health sector is doing a good job of keeping people alive, and And that's all going to take energy, but we must do it in a way that doesn't contribute to cooking the planet at the same time. And that is a fantastic opportunity. So I think either of those two would be great. And as it happens, 3 of my children are all in the medical and the medtech area, but so I'm flying the flag in the energy and power sector for now.
That's very, very smart. And do you see the pandemic changing? Are there behavioural changes that would be permanent, or do you think one shouldn't place too much faith in? People might not travel in the same way.
I think there probably will be some lasting impact, but I think those who say we're going to change completely the way we work, I think that's an exaggeration. I mean, I can remember designing chips in the mid to late 80s, and they were destined to enable this sort of video communication to happen, and it was going to be out in the future, and it was going to make the world a much better place, because villages would come alive as people didn't travel into the city centres. But actually, this pandemic has, whilst been nice for some people to be at home, it's been terrible for others. And there are all sorts of mental health issues associated with remote working. If you're trying to bring up a couple of young kids and you're a single parent and you're in a flat somewhere, and you can't get away from what appears to be a bit of a prison. So I think there are always two sides to the story, and some of the behaviours will change. And the pandemic has taught us that we can adapt, and I think we'll end up with the best of both worlds. We'll have the social benefits of human contact and working together, and again, the technology bringing us the convenience of being able to do this sort of thing remotely.
Thank you. We'll come back to that. If I can go to our next panelist, who is Trudy Norris-Grey, who's very absolutely at the sort of cutting edge of these things that we're talking about. She both heads the WISE campaign, which is Women in Science and Engineering, and she's also chair of UCAS. So she's basically in charge of the future generation and what happens to it, as well as being tremendously experienced in business at Microsoft, and originally from Swansea. Very important that you all have your birthplaces mentioned. And is this right? 7th out of 8 children?
Exactly right, Sarah. I was told.
So did it start? So if we look back at your success, did it start with just sort of Darwinian survival in that family, or what? How can you trace your sort of leadership?
Oh, I think it's undoubted had an impact on me. Is that we didn't have a lot. We were certainly happy, and the job was to get a job. And right when I was looking for work, there was little work around, let alone for somebody who was wearing a skirt in Wales. I'm glad to say things have changed. And of course, there was very little work. So I had to actually cross the border and alight on the tech industry. Just as Warren said, I'm very grateful for luck. Just by chance, I wish I could say I had the foresight. But I've been very, very lucky entering that career path.
And of course, not quite enough women in that career path. I've been working on the Gender Equality Advisory Council for G7, and that was one of the sort of core themes, particularly on things like artificial intelligence. That if you don't have women designing this stuff, they're designing themselves out of the future. So how do you encourage girls, as you did, to take up STEM?
I guess the first thing to say, it's going to be a lifelong journey for me, and hopefully for many others, because we're not making the progress. Even though last year we celebrated 1 million women in STEM careers in the UK, that still represents just about 24%, a quarter of the population, working population. So still a long way to go. And if you go into the IT specialisms world, including artificial intelligence and software skills, we're just still at 17%, and that ratio has hardly changed in 2 decades. What's interesting is that people know it's a really satisfying and rewarding career. But it's the men who are sort of stepping in and being welcomed more than the women, even though they've got the capabilities and they've got the qualifications that would allow them to step forward. So to answer your question, Sarah, it's really about, I do believe in role models. I absolutely believe if you can't see who you could be, you can't be yourself, because you'll take little bits from all over and say that's who and what I want to be. I think there's a whole culture, and let me just say that, because we've done as a nation, Wales and the UK, equal numbers of girls and boys study STEM subjects. What's interesting is 2/3 of women who go on to study STEM subjects, which are an entry qualification to the tech world, are actually not pursuing their subjects beyond graduate degree level or A level. So we're missing out on the welcoming nature that we have to deploy. And then we have to then retain them, because there's a dreadful leaky pipe when it comes to women and the tech world. The culture doesn't sit well. And I guess I'd go back to what Warren said, is that this pandemic, if we're not careful, could be dreadful for women. But actually, if we're pretty agile on this, we could actually turn it to the advantage of everyone, including women. It's because we've accelerated the use of technology like we could never imagined 18 months ago. We would never imagine that hybrid work was a real option for people. So our job is to say, okay, we've had a really tough time physically, mentally, financially. What is it we could do to retain the best talent, including women and all diversity in the workforce? And flexibility is coming out very strongly. Networking is coming out very strongly. Not just the join a club, but actually, as Warren said, we've missed the human interaction, and that's very important when we people from diverse backgrounds need to know that they feel welcome and appreciated and celebrated. And I would say that most companies, including in Wales, need a whole program to say, we're determined to get the best talent. We're going to put energy behind it. We're going to put time and focus behind it. And we're going to change the needle. It's not going to happen, no silver bullet, but I'm interested in people on this panel, people listening in. What are we going to do to make a once and for all change that's systemic and sustainable? So we've got some work to do, but it's not difficult. Those people who have embraced it, making huge strides. And by the way, their financial results are better.
That's a key thing to prove, to self-interest. And can you see, I mean, it's a big subject of what happened to women during the pandemic, and in some ways being forced back into entirely traditional roles of having to work but expected to do, home life as well. Does it worry you that they might, as we recover, see that it's both, convenient to be at working from home, but then as it were, the men may return to the office, the women will stay at home, and that both is more convenient and disadvantages them in terms of promotion?
I think you've said it, Sarah. I think we've got to be alert to that, and we've got to be ready for it. As I said, we've got to be inclusive in our approach. What is it that we need to do to retain you? The other thing that I'm frightened of is, as furlough comes to an end, that terrific scheme for many, is that some people will say, do you know what, it's been so hard, I need a break. I think I'm going to take that package that's on the table. And that's a short hit. It doesn't necessarily benefit the female or the male who might take that as an option. And it's certainly losing talent out of a workforce is not helpful. So we have to really think this one through, and it's just about taking a moment. Do we really want to lose this talent, this potential? Let's make sure that we're not just looking for the fix. whether it's a short quota fix for the organisation or a short term time fix for the woman, and sometimes men, but mainly it's the women who think that this is an option just to get a breather.
It's a good warning. And so if I can now turn to our third panelist, who is Lyndon Faulkner, CEO of Pelican Products, a portfolio company. And I think partly I read is that a temperature control packaging form for the biopharmaceutical industry, which presumably has played a great part in the last year or so. So you're looking at really sort of solutions at a time where people are looking for them. And I wonder how your background has prepared you for this sort of problem-solving role at a historic moment.
Yeah, good morning. So, yeah, we were actually temperature control packaging and the movement of vaccines and biologics has been part of our company now for about 5 or 6 years. So pre any idea we had, there was a pandemic coming along. So we recognized we had a business that's primarily around the world in packaging of protective goods, electronics, military products, those sort of things. And about 6 years ago, we certainly seen and had the vision to see that there was a whole new growth in the medical business, in the pharmaceutical business, if you like. So drugs that need moving around the world in a very exacting temperature. So if you look at the real groundbreaking drugs at the moment is in the cell and gene therapy area, and these drugs are all very, very specialized. They're personalized medicines, and such is the sophistication of the drug, then temperature control is as crucial as the drug. If the drug actually gets moved around and has and moves outside the temperature range it's designed to operate in, then that drug is rendered ineffective. So we got into this business about 5 years ago, moving all of these drugs around, and then heck, the world went crazy. January of last year when the pandemic happened, and then the need for temperature control, moving of these vaccines was very important, and we had already built an infrastructure to be able to support that.
It's amazing, isn't it? That sense of not knowing what's coming, but being just there at that moment of history. It is said about creating the vaccines themselves. It is quite extraordinary that group in Oxford just happened to be studying the one thing that was going to really come into its own, but without any idea that this was on its way. And so have you seen also a sort of change in people's attitude towards pharmaceuticals? That there was, if I look back to sort of John le Carrier and the constant sort of suspicion of the pharmaceutical industry, whereas now it does seem to be, very much the solution, and so presumably it's a pretty good career path for people.
Well, let's when you look at it, I can't but think how anybody would have anything but admiration for what that sector's doing, whether it's developing the next cancer curing drug, or look at the speed they come to market with the vaccines, faster than it could ever have been done before, and saving all our lives today. So I think one has to have just great admiration for what these scientists are turning out, and the technology that's available today. Interestingly, when Technology Week, the technology and resources available to these people to bring these drugs to market that are effective, that are in fast-paced. It's a great industry to be associated with.
And the Prime Minister said he wants Britain to be the UK science, superpower and so on. Do you see how that can happen, and does Wales play a particular part? Are they in R&D, or does it have a sort of special special geographical advantages?
So I think that's got to be answered by Wales itself, right? Are we building infrastructure? Are we creating talent to be able to support that market? And not just support it. Are we going to take a supporting role, or is companies going to step up and take a leadership role? And I think to sort of sit back and say, well, where's Wales going to play in that worldwide market? I live in the States. America's played a major role in not just helping create the drugs, but getting the drugs to the right people. And it's 350 million people here. So they've stepped up. They've got the drugs out. I'm in California, over 70% I think has had their first shot. They stepped up. They've showed the leadership. I think when you ask a question of Wales, we got to ask that question of ourselves and the infrastructure there. Are we building it in order to play a part and a leadership role in those new industries?
Particularly interesting in the US, because you don't have the NHS as a natural sort of structure, and yet the logistics have been terrific, haven't they?
Yes, yeah, it's all privatized medicine here. So, but that aside, I think it still begs the question: what are we doing at home and not just medicine? What about tech? What about artificial intelligence has been mentioned? Are we picking our bets, and are we having the foresight to make sure that we've got people coming out of the universities and we're building talent pools that can then provide leadership in those sectors?
And that, on the subject of leadership and sort of personal leadership, so there were two things I thought were interesting in your biography. Many things that were interesting, but two things struck me. One was that you took a lot of quite menial jobs when you were young. You were making tea, you were on construction sites. You weren't proud. You went in there and you said it taught a sort of work ethic. Do you think that that people should be doing, as it were, the paper round, which is something John Humphrey's never shut up about, but that in order to build up a work ethic, do people have the right attitude towards work?
So that was what you did. I grew up in a council estate, a working class family. So it's what you did. You went to school, you went and got jobs on the weekend, you got the paper round, you tried to put some money in your pocket, and along with that came a very young expectation that one worked hard, and that was your start in life, no matter what it was. So. But I've been associated in Wales with business now for a long time. I don't think we suffer from a lack of work ethic. I think the Welsh, I've had factories in Wales, and never have I questioned the work ethic of our guys coming to work on shifts. And I had a compact disc business in Cwmbran. We developed the compact disc out of a facility in Monmouth back in the day. I don't think there was ever a question for me on work ethic coming out of Wales. And extending from that, look, we're a country. We have great culture. We have a great character as a country, as a group of people. I know plenty of characters in Wales, and I think that sort of thing does allow you to get through good times and bad times. Having that character to get up when you've been knocked down a bit, perhaps something that you've done wasn't as successful as you hoped it would be, and you got to go back in the fight and try and make it happen again. I think a lot of that comes out of our culture, and we do not foster that enough. We tend to be down on each other, and we should be embracing that, I think, way more than we do at home. Certainly, I live in the States, and the States has a very can-do culture. Very can-do attitude to being successful and what they can do next. I'd like to see more of that enhanced.
Are they more generous about sort of failure, that you can come back? Whereas, do you see more in Britain that we write people off to? There's always talks about the next act in the US. Is there more of that you can make mistakes? You're allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah, I think, but then take that, does that have to be the States? You know, I think, again, that's the leadership of the people that you're working with. If people are going to go out there, make mistakes and get, you know, criticized for it, ridiculed for it, and you're not going to get many people out on the plank trying to do something different because of the worry of failure or rejection to that failure. I think you, as a leader, you've got to build a culture where people take a bit of chances and not too worry if they fall over. Perhaps there should be a bit of a culture where we all rally around somebody if they fall over and pick them up and let's go do the next thing. So I think that's
presume you've seen that in, I mean, you played rugby for Newport, didn't you? And I think presumably there are some sporting analogies here about sort of team spirit and picking up your jersey. Was that the All Blacks thing that was the sort of standout lesson?
I think there's a lot of parallels come out of certainly high level sports, you know, team sports, camaraderie, competition, winning. You know, I think you take all of that, working hard, you know, working to be the best. I think they're all parallels that you can take into business. You know, you don't want to lose. You want to be the best that you can be. So I think yes, there was an awful lot I learned out of sports generally, playing rugby and the like, that applied those fundamentals applied to business, translated into successful businesses as well.
Interesting. Well, we'll talk about that sense of winning, because at the moment there does seem to be an environment where some companies are going to do incredibly well, you know, in this new environment. And one of them seems to be Halma PLC. So if we could turn to our fourth panelist, Andrew Williams, who's the CEO of Halma. And again, you just seem to be exactly in the right place of looking at, you know, safety, health and environmental solutions is what we're all looking for now. So I wonder if I could talk a bit about your background of what brought you to where you are now, in terms of, you know, was it your sort of temperament, education, you know, sort of amazing foresight, or tell us a bit about your route.
Yeah, well, I'm Cardiff born and bred, so I went to a city comprehensive. As I said, I had a great social education. Not sure the academic education was as good as it could be. And I reflect actually in my education, and I think it is something that we still got to address. I compare me then with my children now, who we live in the southeast of England, and the degree of ambition and aspiration I had was nothing compared to what my children have today. So I do think somewhere along the line, you say, how did I get to where I got to? Actually, for me, the spark came when I had my first job. It was actually part of AB Electronics, which is in those days, one of the first Welsh-based public companies, electronics business. And it was my first boss, who was only 4 or 5 years older than me. And he was the first person who actually said to me, you know, that he gave me that confidence. He believed in me. He thought I had something special that I could do something with. And it was that injection of confidence and sort of self-assurance that then got me to realize, actually, you know, in the world of work, I could make progress. I could move ahead, and I was the first person in my family to go into business. All my family, they're still in Cardiff. They're still either teachers or doctors or involved in healthcare. So they had no idea what business was about. But I started to make progress, and then I saw an advert in the Western Mail, which is the local sort of Welsh daily paper in those days, and it was with a company in Cwmbran who Halma had just acquired. And it was a very small company back in 1994, so I'd have been sort of 26, 27. And it was, believe it or not, it was a business that was involved in water leak detection. It was a global leader in finding leaks in water pipes. Well, in 1995, we had the drought in the UK, and Ofwat was created, and suddenly we had this huge growth in the business on the back of the drought. And through that, I made my way up through the organisation and actually became CEO of Halma in 2005. So I've been CEO of the group for now sort of 16, 17 years. And we've grown, still a global business, 45 companies all over the world, all, as you say, focused on safety, healthcare, or the environment. And when we've grown into a FTSE 100 group worth over £10 billion today. So it's been a real shift from that starting point of coming out of school, not really knowing what what I wanted to do. And then just by someone having confidence in me, actually then starting to sort of flourish in the work environment.
It's a wonderful story, and so that sense of who that person is, because Warren, you said earlier, you need to be yourself. Don't start with a sort of role model, and yet that sense of whether you have the sort of confidence to be able to make your own way, or that someone has to help you. I mean, do you all just sort of across the panel? Did you all have mentors, or not? And is there, in the same way, sometimes it's a sort of teacher, but this is someone in the business themselves who saw the point of view. So, Warren, did you have that? Someone who encouraged you?
Yeah, I had a series of excellent bosses. I mean, I had some bosses that are probably less good, but one of the things that I was encouraged in the same way that Andrew just spoke was, ambition is important. And if you, if you don't enter the race, you stand zero chance of winning. So the first thing to do is latch onto the ambition and say you're going to try.
Trudy, how does that sound to you? I mean, we've talked about you being sort of how you make good leaders, but did you need a good boss in order to become a good leader?
I've got to say, I wish I'd had a mentor. So that answers your question. But like Warren, I had some great bosses, not all of them, but certainly. And I can think of a couple who needled me. They needled me because they wanted me to take more risks, to get outside my comfort zone, to let go of the tree that I was comfortable with and go try something new, because they saw something in me, a bit like Andrew, that I possibly didn't see in myself. And it was taking those steps, and it added my confidence, and it allowed me to learn. And it also told me risks are really important, whether it's risk from a business point of view or a people point of view or a partner point of view. But you get out there, because if you're not in the game, as Warren said, you can't play. So I would, if anybody's listening here, I would seek out a mentor. If you don't have a great boss, definitely seek one out. But also give bosses a little bit of leeway. If they're on your case, you think they're on your case, it may be because they're pushing you. They're more ambitious for you than you are for yourself. So welcome those kinds of bosses.
That's interesting that, the tough boss can be a good boss, because is there a slight, switch of culture now that it should be all kind of encouragement and, less of the criticism? So presumably you had to learn how to be criticized as well.
I did.
Yeah.
There's a term that's called support and challenge. I'm sure you've all heard about it. And that's the real magic ingredient when you're pushing somebody, is you've got to support them, right? Let's remember that be encouraging, but challenge them. It's not because they do everything right. You can't be soft about this if you're going to learn. So support and challenge.
And Lyndon, you took a big risk during the financial crash, didn't you, of 2008? So we're talking about, taking a risk, going out of your comfort zone. So just when everyone would think, let's just shut down and, wait for this to pass, you acquired a competitor. And is that so? What made you think this is the time to use this opportunity? Because presumably that really speaks to our times now. Is this a time for risk or to play safe?
So the general expectation at that time, it was no time for any risk. It was, nobody knew what the future. It was 2008 to 2010 market crash. Wall Street was in turmoil. Companies were going bankrupt. Banks were not being able to support their obligations. And yeah, we actually chose that time to buy, one or two of our biggest competitors out, which was viewed at the time as very much out there. Nothing else. I think when we did the deal, it was the only deal done on Wall Street for months. Lehman Brothers were going bankrupt, things like that. And yes, we went to the street and borrowed money at huge interest rates. because that's the only way you could borrow the money at the time. And we bought some, companies that we wouldn't have otherwise been able to buy if it wasn't for the recession. So really, it was a case of taking advantage of the situation. But yeah, that was looked back at now as a great move, looked upon at the time as people that had lost our minds.
Did you feel a bit sick about it? Did you lose any sleep, or you just believed in yourself?
Yeah, no, I don't think we ever doubted the idea. I think probably execution at that time was hard because there wasn't any money out there. But no, unless you felt that recession was never going to come back, in the long haul, we believed it was the right thing to do, and it was the only trigger time that we could do it. But yeah, buying out a company that was as big as we were, equally as big as we were, and actually we bought some add-on companies in the UK at the same time. So yeah, everybody looks at that now as in your resume and say, "Wow, that was great." At the time, I think they were questioning our sanity.
And Andrew, it looks as if your companies have just sort of consistently, steadily built. But have there been some moments, where you've really sort of doubted your judgment or being able to kind of read the economic climate? Have there been? I think everyone likes to hear about sort of moments of as it were, doubt and failure as well as success.
Yeah, well, first I think Warren mentioned part of your job though is to be listening hard to your team and what's going out there, and actually joining the dots and synthesizing things down into actually quite simple messages for the rest of the organization. So I do think if you've got an approach of leadership where you're actively listening to what's going on around you, you to some extent mitigate making at least the big mistakes. I mean, in my role, I think probably the two biggest decisions are the people, the senior leaders you've got around you, and then same as Lyndon, sort of in my job, it's buying and selling companies. So those are the two big judgments that if you get them wrong, consistently wrong, then you're going to struggle a bit more. And I do think, again, that can be a cultural thing as well. I mean, you need to then create the environment where people are willing to tell you when they think you're perhaps off track or not thinking about things in the right way. One of the things that I've done with hindsight over a long period as CEO is actually I've been constantly changing my leadership group. So the way in which we lead today is completely different from the way I lead, completely different from 5 or 10 years ago. And the kind of people on my leadership group are completely different. And I think that comes from really dovetailing the growth strategy with the talent you need to execute on that, and recognizing as the growth strategy evolves, so does the people you've got in your business change, and the way you lead has got to change too. So is that a kind of quite a quick turnover of senior people around you, or do you or you just reallocate or according to? Well, yeah. So I mean, we're probably, and again, we're not aiming to do it, but with hindsight, we find that we're churning about 15% of our top leaders every year. If I go back when I took over as CEO in 2005, I re-articulated the purpose, and as a result of that, we sold 25 of the 40 companies, and we changed about 80% of the top 250 people in the first 2 years. That wasn't the objective at the beginning of setting out the strategy, but if you set the strategy out and you understand it's about execution, it has all sorts of impacts then in the way you lead, the people you have, and the kind of businesses you have in your portfolio. And those are times, you talk about times when you doubt yourself as a leader. Those are times when you realize the consequences of the things you do when you're at the top and how they cascade down to the organization. You realize they have really profound impact on the people in your business. And for some, that'll be great news, and for others, that'll be a more challenging message. Interesting. And Warren, you've made some very big decisions. One is the major changes of direction. So if Rolls Royce, originally I would have known it as a very fancy car, and now it's about sort of power. But you've had to look at defence, and you've had to look at the future of air travel and so on. I mean, how do you sort of prepare yourselves for that real sort of visionary leadership?
I mean, I think it's a bit like Andrew said. The world is changing, and if the company stands still as the world is changing about it, then the company is not going to thrive and prosper. And so, I wouldn't describe it as major fundamental. We woke up on Wednesday and decided to do something completely different. No, it's quite thought through, and the change that we're on at the moment is recognizing that the world of fossil fuels is changing. When I joined Rolls Royce, perhaps 96% of our revenues were associated with setting fire to fossil fuels, I thought this is crazy, because in a few decades' time, if that's what our business is about, then our business is going to be about this big, and so we set about sort of embracing it as an opportunity rather than a threat, and and now we have revenue targets for that transition, but it isn't a transition that's happening overnight. So that was a kind of, it wasn't particularly brave. It was just absolutely essential for the purpose of survival. Some of my ones that were a bit more potentially risky were when we made some various bets on ARM, at ARM around some acquisition activity that we did. And, a bit like the others have said, hiring people, you can really mess it up, particularly hiring leaders. Buying the wrong company, you can really mess it up. And you have to have courage of convictions. And I sat there the morning we announced an acquisition, and I sat there at 10 to 7 before the announcement with our finance director, and we had a quick sweepstake on how much the share price would go up. And by about 10 past 7, the share price was down 30%, something like that. And that was quite scary. And by day 2, we put all the fancy banker PowerPoints to one side, and I took to the whiteboard and explained the strategy to the investors and said, this is actually going to take a few years. And what a good job we did in the end, because what we were doing was anticipating an evolution in the world. And sometimes you just have to do that. Again, not particularly. It didn't feel like rocket science at the time, but when we found ourselves moving in the opposite direction from where the market expected us to be moving, then it was a bit worrying.
Now it literally is rocket science, isn't it? As you're looking at space and so on, and I think it's interesting too, going from a sort of commercial proposition to sort of literally saving the planet, which is another thing that's changed, I guess, for all of business. Is that social purpose. And Trudy, presumably you've seen, with the rise of sort of ESG and so on, the importance of business having that purpose. And you talk about leadership, sort of teams, presumably that diversity of thinking, that comes from diversity of background, that becomes a much greater issue if it's where your ideas are coming from.
Absolutely. If we do look at the outliers, let me just give you a few. If I think about what Warren is talking about, climate change, there've been outliers talking about this for a long, long time, and it is knowing when to move. So, for example, the Prince of Wales, bear in mind this is a Welsh event, he's been talking about this forever and a day. And there comes a time when you have to act. It's not a problem, but it's an opportunity. And in the computing world, Bill Gates talked about putting a computer on every desk, and now we're in the cloud. It's about living in a dynamic world, understanding that, having the diversity of thought in the organization and tapped into the outside of the organization that makes sure that you understand that dynamism. Understand where the opportunity is for the organization. Usually it lies in what I call unmet needs. What are the needs that nobody else is addressing that we could address if we step forward now? And the other thing I wanted to pick up is that if you run in a tight and good operation, my argument would be, amongst other things, is that you build a war chest for the time you want to act, whether it's a time of recession or a time of change, or a time where you have to, you know, look at Shell right now, all the court cases that's happened in the Netherlands that says you're going to have to change because there's going to be a legal suit on you if you don't. So it's really getting ahead of the curve, but being embracing of it as an opportunity. But as you said, it's about that inclusion of diverse thinking, capability, approach, and bringing it in a systemic way, so that you do reflect the customer opportunity, you do reflect the delivery capability that you have or need to have, and you have that innovation that goes with it. So I can't, you know, around the table, we've not talked around this, but that those outliers, those innovative thinkers, those creative nuisances sometimes, but sometimes it's just, hey, I've been saying this for a while, but let's, you know, now's a really good time to act on it. So having an inclusive approach as well as diverse talent, really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's the real meaning of diversity. You know, gender and ethnicity and all that sort of thing are excellent proxies, but that sort of, we call it the grit in the oyster.
Exactly.
Is really important to help shake others out of thinking which can get a bit stale and entrenched.
Yeah, it's that grit that makes the poo.
I'm hoping some questions are going to be coming in, but in the meanwhile, I'm just going to put that question to Lyndon, as someone who sort of took those risks. Can business be sort of too far ahead? You talked about Prince Charles. You know, is there a sort of sweet spot between being, you know, the first person to see something, but, you know, society or hasn't caught up with you, and being exactly in the right place just when people are something's becoming mainstream? What's the best time for business?
Oh, the best place. Certainly, you can get it wrong. You can have the right idea at the wrong time, and there's. You know, we can look back at technology, we can look back at business ideas, and there was absolutely nothing wrong with the business ideas. I think of Amazon today. I go back 20 years and there was companies trying to do the same thing, but the infrastructure around the world wasn't the same. They all died on a vine. Great ideas, just the wrong time. So yes, I think you can get the timing wrong, for sure. You can be too early, you can be too late to a party. Timing is crucial.
And Andrew, you're investing and looking then for where interesting things are happening. How do you know when's the right time to go in?
Well, one thing, we don't rely on me, and I mean that seriously. We're a group of 45 companies, and the expertise and the market knowledge is down in those companies, and we're structured in a very decentralized way, so that we're keeping the product development, the marketing, the channel to market, the manufacturing really close to the market, so that, and you build in that agility into your business. That's one of the things we haven't talked about. I do think that in today's world, having agility is a huge advantage in terms of, if you do get it wrong, or you need to move slightly quicker, you're not waiting for it to go up the chain of command before the decision's taken to move. You need to move now. And I think organizations that have got that organizational design, but also then have built the culture and the leadership culture so that people are prepared to take decisions without going up to the boss every 5 minutes, I think are going to succeed. And again, it's a design actually Halma's had for 50 years. So it's nothing that I've bought in, but it's proving, the last year has proved that sort of structure and that approach is becoming even more important in today's world, as things are moving so fast, and those unmet customer needs, you need to be in a place where you can pick those up quite quickly, but then do something about it.
And can you, how much, Warren, can you rely now on just sort of algorithmic sort of thinking, and how much is it still have to have a sort of creative imagination, as it were? Could you make decisions on an algorithm?
Oh, I think there's elements of both. I mean, clearly you're sort of leading the witness here into artificial intelligence, and I regard artificial intelligence as a useful tool, but actually no more than a tool. But good tools help us do better jobs, and so I absolutely don't diss algorithms, but don't forget all your competitors can buy those tools as well. And the only thing that distinguishes your company from another company is the collection of people that you have, and the way in which those people work. And it's a bit like sports teams. You can have different collections of people, and then individuals can you think, gosh, this is a fantastic collection of individuals, but it turns out to be a lousy team. And similarly, you can have a fantastic team and you look at the individuals and you think, well, how on earth do they do it? I mean, I've spoken with whoever it is, and they're not anything special to write home about, but actually it is that collection of people which differentiates the company. And like Andrew said, what the modus operandi for how the people interact within the business, that's what makes the difference.
That's interesting. And you've talked about sort of agility and people feeling sort of empowered, but is that, Trudy, does that demand a different kind of structure from what we're used to, which is quite centralized, top down, boss is the boss? So do you see the structure needs to change in order to keep pace with it?
Unquestionably. I think when you talk about agile people or agile processes, then you really are putting teams at the front, nearest the customer, if that's what we're talking about. They have got the ability, or should have the ability, if chosen correctly, to really read the rooms and act. And the other piece of the culture that's come out from comments already said is this concept of empowerment. What are you going to empower them? You pay them good salaries. Are you going to stymie them, restrict them in what they're able to do when they do have the answer? You have to light that fire. But you also need the mechanism then for it to quickly rise to the top so you know what's going on. Because leaders, there's something else I'd like to add, is that leaders, if you have a good collection of people around you, as Warren has said, the leader enables ordinary people to do extraordinary things. So you really want that capability that says, yep, you tried it, it didn't work this time, but what did we learn? We're going to use that next time. It really is putting that structure in place around leadership and accepting that none of us knows it all. What we have to do is learn it all. And having everybody firing on that cylinder rather than the leader or the top team, that is wholly inefficient and certainly not rewarding for the individual. So absolutely, long way of saying, spot on. Let's give and empower the individual who see the change so that they can enact the change. But you have to be a water carrier as a leader. Help them with it.
That's a good analogy. Water carrier. You'll know about that, Lyndon. It's a rugby term, I think, isn't it? Is it? Where do you stand on sort of authority then, which is something that we've seen particularly in the world of tech? You may have young people who are much that this is much more natural to them than it is to perhaps some of our more distinguished people of a greater age. And do you sense that there's a sort of generational sort of topsy-turviness, or you can handle that there may be people who know more, as it were, than you do? That was one to Lyndon, but it could go to anyone.
Yeah. Look, you're going to have different people that have different characters, right? Some are going to be outgoing. In my experience, some of my most influential people have been quite difficult people to deal with. And I think you've got to challenge yourself there. How do you make sure you allow that person to be creative, to make a contribution to your business, even though they might be quieter than the next guy? So I think I think for me, it's all about creating that environment to allow your people to be the best they can be, regardless of how they might come about that. And I think it is, you go back to leadership, it's all about the culture, and it's all about creating an environment where people have their say. I think diversity today plays a very powerful part in that. You have to have that representation around the table if you're going to be thinking properly. So I think, again, that's all about the culture that you're creating with the company that you're at. Look, I've worked for some horrible bosses, and I wouldn't want to operate the way they did. But it's taught me other ways. It's taught me, frankly, what I wouldn't want out of companies I run.
Yes, that's well, I won't ask you to name and shame them, but we're and sadly, I think we're coming up to the end of the hour. But perhaps if I could just finish by asking you all, since this is Wales Tech Week, just what your one piece of advice to a young person starting out, in tech, who wants to be you one day. What would your advice, as it were, to the young you be, and therefore to the people listening? So, Andrew, can we go to you?
Yeah, I suppose I'd say you say two things to our sort of future leaders when they come on. The first one is, whatever you want to do ultimately in your career, get some operational experience. Get on the shop. In our case, get on the shop floor. Start working with people. Understand. You learn so much just running a line on a factory floor for 3 months. You learn everything you need to know about management for the rest of your career when you get out there and start dealing with real people. And the second thing is, be that person who's hungry to learn, because the more you show that you're hungry to learn, the more you'll find you'll attract mentors, and you'll attract people who want to talk to you about what they know and what they do, because they realize you listen and you put it into practice. So those would be the two things for me.
Thank you. Warren, what would be your top tip?
I generally say ambition, and things get done by doing, not by talking.
And there's a difference, is there? Do you come across,
Yeah.
that?
I mean, goodness me, you have these people who have a great meeting and they've talked about something, and you say, well, what about the plan for doing? And they say, oh, good, we must talk about that.
Yeah. So execution matters. But,
yeah.
Trudy, what would you say, your advice to the young you?
I'm going to summarize. I definitely believe in lifelong learning. You don't know what is in front of us, so better keep ahead of your learning. Accept that we're all lifelong learners. I absolutely agree with the point on ambition. I agree with the point. I have a saying: act your way to the future. You cannot talk your way to the future. Act your way to the future, and be known for who you are. If you're customer focused, be customer focused. Take a particular interest and have a passion to represent that. If you're more around, for example, the technology, then be that person, get your voice heard. But be clear about who you are and have the confidence and the ambition to put your voice out there. Bring your voice forward. We need more leaders. And that includes being a team player within a leadership team. So be that person, go for it.
And Lyndon, that was a sort of sporting analogy again about the sort of team and your part in it. How much self-knowledge do you need? Because sometimes you may change that. So do you know what you're good at, early, or is that something that you discover later on?
I don't think you stop discovering. It's something that you, if you're smart, you're going to learn from things every day of your life, and you don't stop learning. I think that's just something hopefully you've got the people around you where you're learning from them every day of the week, just like they're learning from yourself. But I certainly think for the people, on listening to this today, if you're looking to be a leader, then you're going to have to throw out characteristics of why people are going to follow you. You know, you're going to have to share that confidence with them. You're going to have to build trust to the people that you have around you. You're going to have to portray vision for where you're going to go. You know, don't always listen to the naysayers, because there's lots of those out there. So I think you've got to believe in what you're doing, and have the people around you believe in that as well. I think that's, if you're going to be a leader, that's what you're going to have to do.
I've learned a great deal over this last hour, and thank you very much indeed to the leaders of the present and leaders of the future. You know, we hope we'll be seeing you on this stage in future years. So thank you so much to Global Welsh, and thank you very much to our terrific panel, and I hope you all have a very good evening.
Thank you for watching. Rewatch all of our sessions online. Thank you to our partners.